The man shows up to his late wife's funeral with his mistress on his arm, showing no respect for the loyalty and dignity his wife had kept throughout her life. With stunning nerve, he lets his hungry eyes roam over the attractive woman beside him. Standing nearby with a conflicted look on her face is another woman, the deceased's cousin, Bette. Bette thinks back to the last time she saw her cousin. Sitting beside her as she lay dying in bed, Bette showed not a single trace of grief. The two of them had grown up together as children, yet the family elders had sent Bette off to the countryside while her cousin stayed in the family home and received a proper education. When her cousin came of age, she was given a generous dowry and married a baron as a woman of standing. Bette, now past 40 and still single, scrapes by doing odd jobs. Whenever her cousin comes up in conversation, a deep, unspoken bitterness and jealousy stirs inside her and fills her with resentment. Her cousin's final words from her deathbed were a plea for Bette to look after her young daughter, Hortense. She had long since lost any faith in that pleasure-chasing husband of hers. Faced with a dying relative, Bette reluctantly said yes. After the funeral, only Hortense in the entire household truly grieved the loss of her mother. Everyone else carried on as though the woman had never existed. Bette was convinced that her brother-in-law would certainly marry her and make her his new wife. She pictured herself soon becoming the lady of the house and could barely suppress a laugh at the thought. But to her complete surprise, the baron, in front of his son, daughter-in-law, and daughter Hortense, announced that he wanted to bring Bette on as the household housekeeper. Bette was crushed. She understood then that her brother-in-law only wanted her around to look after his daughter. Bette turned him down flat. She would rather stay in her messy, run-down rented room and scrape by as a seamstress than serve as a domestic in her cousin's house. A theater company hired Bette to sew costumes for their actresses. One actress named Jenny had come from the countryside, just like Bette. The shared hardship of leaving their hometowns to make a life in Paris, along with their similar backgrounds, brought them close quickly, the kind of friends who could talk about anything. But Jenny was carefree, sweet-faced, and naturally charming, and she was never short of admirers. Bette, on the other hand, held old-fashioned values and was deeply conservative. Her life was dull and routine, and she had never even known the flutter of a secret first romance. While Jenny moved easily among different gentlemen and attended all sorts of social events, Bette sat alone in her rented room, quietly bearing the steady ache of loneliness. Yet her pride always pushed her to appear calm and unbothered whenever she was around others. When her niece asked why she had never married, Bette made up a story, claiming she actually had a deeply devoted partner, but that she refused to let marriage tie her down, which was why she had stayed single. As Hortense listened to her aunt's made-up love story, she found herself wondering where her own perfect match might be. What neither Hortense nor Bette knew was that the baron, through reckless spending and a chaotic personal life, now had nothing left but his empty noble title. The family fortune was gone, and financial ruin was closing in. Hortense had reached the age for marriage, but since the baron could not put together a dowry fitting their status, every young nobleman who came to propose was turned away. In his desperation to find a solution, the suitors the baron lined up for his daughter were truly hard to look at. One was a white-haired old man trying desperately to seem youthful, and the other was a short, overweight merchant who behaved crudely and had already outlived 3 wives. When the merchant first met Hortense, he went so far as to offer 20,000 francs just for the chance to admire her figure. Hortense was horrified by this vulgar man. Hearing the commotion, Bette hurried over to see what was going on. Seeing how furious the merchant had become, Bette tried to smooth things over by offering to introduce him to Jenny, and that finally cooled him down. This was because just the day before, Bette had found out from Jenny that the baron had not given her any financial support in a long time, a sign that he could barely keep himself afloat. Bette passed this news along to her niece Hortense as well. That same night, when Bette arrived home, she noticed a foul smell drifting through the hallway. Following the trail of smoke, she found a young man in a small second-floor room who was trying to take his own life by burning charcoal. The moment she saw the young man's handsome face, Bette felt something stir inside her, and she pulled him back from the edge and nursed him carefully for 3 days and 3 nights. When the young man finally opened his eyes, he could scarcely believe he was still alive. As they talked, he learned that it was Bette who had stayed by his side without rest and brought him back to life. It was also the first time Bette had ever been in such close company with a man, and her heart had already begun racing. A few days later, through Betty's introduction, the wealthy merchant came to see Jenny perform. From the very first glance, he was completely taken with her. After the show, the merchant arrived backstage carrying expensive gifts, eager to meet Jenny, but the Baron also appeared, a man who had once nearly become his son-in-law and had now turned into his rival. Betty's life suddenly felt full of light and hope now that the young man had entered it. Every evening after finishing her work, she carefully prepared a meal and waited for him to come upstairs and eat with her. The young man was deeply touched, and as they grew closer he told Bette his name, Wenceslas, a struggling sculptor who had not sold a single piece of work. Bette believed wholeheartedly in his talent, and she decided to pour her life savings into helping Wenceslas find success and recognition. They shared a delicate bond that sat somewhere between friendship and romance, living their days together side by side. To get Wenceslas's sculptures in front of people, Bette went to work as a cleaner at an antique shop, turning down any pay and asking only that the owner give up a window space to display Wenceslas's work. Wenceslas clearly understood that Bette treated him this way because she loved him, yet he never returned her feelings, nor did he push her away. But Bette foolishly took this in-between arrangement to mean that they were together. Growing bolder, she once again bragged to Hortense about how remarkable her partner was, so young, so handsome, so talented. Her words naturally made Hortense curious about the man her aunt kept going on about. She longed to see for herself what he was really like. Before long, thanks to Betty's efforts, one of Wenceslas's sculptures found its way into the antique shop. And Bette, who loved showing off her man in front of Hortense, casually mentioned that her partner's work had already caught the eye of the shop owner and been purchased. One day, Hortense pretended to ask her father to take a walk with her, and cleverly steered the Baron toward that antique shop by taking a roundabout route. She browsed the store as though she were simply passing time, and only after chatting with the owner for a while did she confirm which piece belonged to Wenceslas. When the owner named his price, Hortense did not haggle at all and agreed to buy it on the spot. At that very moment, Wenceslas walked through the door, and after a short conversation Hortense confirmed who he was and they exchanged details. When Wenceslas got home, he told Bette with great excitement that his sculpture had finally sold. After being rewarded with an enthusiastic kiss from Wenceslas, Bette felt even more certain that he loved her in return. But before long, Wenceslas made his way over to the Baron's home. After seeing the Baron's respected position in society, Wenceslas felt as though he had already stepped one foot into the world of high society. What Bette had no idea about was that her own niece was quietly plotting to take her lover away. Hortense peered at the handsome Wenceslas from just outside the door, already confident she would win. The Baron, too, was willing to stake his hopes on Wenceslas's talent, and he immediately gave his blessing for him to court Hortense. From that point on, Wenceslas began meeting Hortense in secret behind Betty's back. In age, looks, background, and standing, Hortense had the upper hand over Bette in every way, and Wenceslas knew it perfectly well. When the dinner hour came and went 3 times and Wenceslas still had not come home, a creeping unease settled into Betty's heart. Meanwhile, Wenceslas was whispering affectionate words to Hortense in the park, having forgotten that Bette existed at all. When he finally thought to check the time, he offered no explanation, rushed his farewell to Hortense, and ran home as fast as he could. Men can be this cold, wanting everything at once. As long as they are not completely sure of one side, they will not let go of the other. Sure enough, when he walked through the door, Bette was waiting with a dark expression, demanding to know where he had been. Wenceslas had no interest in explaining himself, he had slowly grown tired of her. Just as he moved to leave, Bette suddenly softened and even apologized for her own reaction. In an effort to look younger, Bette went to Jenny and asked her for advice on how to dress and carry herself. But inside Jenny's room, she suddenly noticed the sculpture Wenceslas had sold. Jenny told her it was a gift from the Baron the previous day, and that she had been told it came from a struggling sculptor, one who, the Baron had mentioned, was soon to become his son-in-law. For Bette, this news hit like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Her cousin had taken her place in life, and now her cousin's daughter was taking the man she loved. A dark and terrifying plan for revenge began forming in Betty's mind. When she followed Wenceslas and saw the two of them together with her own eyes, she stood hidden in the shadows, clenching her teeth with fury, and all the bitterness and heartbreak of half a lifetime poured out at once. If you enjoy movie breakdowns like this, click the subscribe button. I post recaps like this every week. From that moment on, Hortense, fully aware that she had wronged her aunt, cut off all contact with Bette completely. After confirming his wedding date with Hortense, Wenceslas finally sat Bette down and told her the whole truth. He said he had always leaned on her the way one leans on a mother, and that beyond that, there had never been any other feeling. Bette did not argue or cause a scene. she said only a single sentence. Not long after, the Baron borrowed money to put on a grand wedding for his daughter. His circle of friends were all well aware of his circumstances, and their backhanded congratulations, laced with quiet mockery, left the Baron restless and irritable. Amid all the noise and festivity, Bette also walked in. The Baron's estate looked lively and impressive, and the kind of ruin that high society whispered about seemed to have left no visible mark on their way of living. The newlyweds were inseparable, and Bette arrived at just the right moment, as the ball was getting underway. Under the glow of the music, Hortense and Wenceslas looked radiant and full of joy. But Betty's sudden appearance put them both on edge. Yet Bette said or did nothing out of place, and instead offered the couple what sounded like genuine congratulations. Hortense naively believed that her aunt's graciousness came from care for their family bond, but no one caught the strange and unreadable look buried in Betty's eyes. A year went by, and Wenceslas and Hortense had a son. Bette stepped forward on her own and offered to come and help look after them. Watching the young couple enjoy the warm sunshine together in the courtyard, Bette was so consumed with anger that she hurled the cup in her hand to the ground. Wenceslas was still unknown and going nowhere, and Hortense had begun to feel a quiet disappointment in her husband, though she still clung to the belief that his talent would one day be recognized. Using the excuse of connecting him with potential patrons, Bette regularly brought Wenceslas along to meet the regular visitors at the theater. At these gatherings, Wenceslas began to show his true character. He flirted openly with worldly women right in front of his wife, just as his father-in-law had always done, and brazenly pulled them close. By this point the Baron was already in serious financial trouble, yet the household's way of life had not visibly changed. When the Baron's son pointed out that their debts had grown enormous and that old acquaintances had begun pressing for repayment, the Baron always brushed it off as though it were nothing. When the nephew complained to Bette about his father, Bette quietly told him that certain underground lenders had very loose requirements for borrowing and that he might try his luck there. Following Betty's advice, the Baron's son managed to borrow a substantial 30,000 francs from one of these underground sources. In an effort to cut costs, the Baron's son dismissed half the household staff. Watching her cousin's family slowly sink into ruin, Bette felt a quiet satisfaction stir inside her. At the same time, in order to needle her brother-in-law further, Bette conspired with Jenny to engineer a situation where rivals would come face to face. When the wealthy merchant appeared from among the elegantly dressed women at the gathering, the Baron, a man whose noble title had been granted personally by the king, felt deeply humiliated by the sight. Nudged along by Betty's subtle maneuvering, the Baron decided to challenge the merchant to a duel. At that time a duel was legally recognized, and if one party died, the other bore no blame. But in the end neither man dealt a killing blow, and Betty's scheme to have one man destroy the other fell flat. As time wore on, the family spending continued to outpace whatever came in. Looking at his still unsuccessful son-in-law, the Baron burned with frustration. In the Baron's eyes, Wenceslas had never truly been regarded as a son-in-law, he had always been viewed as nothing more than an investment. After the Baron stormed off, Hortense's brother also lashed out, insisting that they had to start bearing some of the family's financial burden themselves no matter what. The debt to the underground lender, swollen by outrageous interest, had ballooned to more than 5 times the original amount, and threatening demands for repayment came every single day. Their father was useless, and now the daughter and son-in-law were proving to be no better. He swore he would no longer carry this family, and said that if it came to it, he would move back to his wife's family home and rebuild from there. Surveying this fractured and struggling family before her, Bette quietly smiled to herself from the sidelines. Wenceslas's pride took a severe blow, and having his dependence on others laid bare so openly filled him with shame he could barely stand. Once the others had all left, Bette sidled up to Wenceslas with a suggestion. She had a very wealthy friend, and given the connection between them, Jenny might be willing to offer Wenceslas some help. Meanwhile, in order to raise her son, Hortense, now without the support of her brother, decided to approach the wealthy merchant who had once pursued her. Setting her pride aside, she made it plain that if the merchant was willing to lend her money, she would allow him to look upon her. In just 2 short years, their situations had entirely flipped, and the cruel irony of it was impossible to ignore. But what even Bette had not counted on was that the merchant Crevel did not take advantage of Hortense. On the contrary, he felt genuine sympathy for her and lent her 20,000 francs without asking for anything improper in return. What Hortense did not know, however, was that after watching Jenny perform, her husband had already begun harboring inappropriate feelings for the deeply captivating actress. And in truth, all of this had been quietly set up by Jenny in advance as a way of helping her friend carry out her revenge. Jenny only had to show the slightest interest, and Wenceslas was so consumed with excitement that he completely lost his footing, because novelty is very often a man's most fatal weakness. As time passed, Wenceslas sank further and further into this new affair. Bette made regular visits to Jenny to check on how the plan was unfolding. Jenny told her that everything was moving along exactly as they had arranged. At the same time, Bette began quietly and deliberately hinting to Hortense that Wenceslas had already been unfaithful to her. And while her brother-in-law was resting during his afternoon nap, Bette also slipped him the exact location where Wenceslas and Jenny were secretly meeting. Hortense leapt into a carriage and raced there, desperate to catch them in the act. At the same moment, the Baron left the house carrying a rifle. Inside a room at the inn, Wenceslas and Jenny were completely absorbed in their private encounter, with no idea that a reckoning was bearing down on them. The Baron arrived at the inn first, and father and daughter moved through the building one after the other. When the Baron followed a sound to a guest room and saw what was inside, he collapsed on the spot. At the same moment, Hortense also spotted her father. Even after his unfaithfulness was fully exposed, Wenceslas showed no interest in explaining himself to his wife. He simply stopped coming home, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Bette continued to speak coldly in front of both father and daughter about Wenceslas's heartlessness, feeding the hatred already growing in their chests. The Baron's health grew steadily worse. Hortense and Bette soon noticed that he had taken to clutching a rifle wherever he went. Not long after, Hortense went downstairs, leaned close and whispered something into her father's ear, and when she stood up the rifle was gone. Bette seemed to sense what was coming, yet she did nothing to stop it. Just as Wenceslas was suggesting to Jenny that the two of them run away together, Jenny turned him down outright. At that very moment, a knock came at the door. The gunshot that followed found Wenceslas at a fatal point. Before Wenceslas had even been laid to rest, the police had already come to the house. Hortense looked helplessly at her aunt, hoping Bette might do something to help her. But Bette replied with an icy calm, "May God watch over you." She took one last look at Wenceslas, then walked out with the same cold expression, leaving Jenny standing there in stunned silence. Yet Bette did not turn her back on her bedridden brother-in-law. She stayed on in the Baron's house and continued caring for both the Baron and Hortense's son. Through all of her scheming, she had finally obtained the sense of power she had craved for so long. Bette's life was a tragic one. Her cousin had claimed all the family's resources and left Bette to a life of poverty. And when her niece took away the man she loved, the last thread holding her reason together snapped. Once the seed of terrible revenge is planted, the outcome is almost always destruction on both sides. She was frightening, and yet she was also a deeply pitiable and tragic figure. If you have never lived through another person's pain, be slow to pass judgment on the choices they make. Bette spent her entire life trapped beneath the shadow of her cousin's family.